What is the creepiest thing that ever happened to you but never told anyone?
I was 13 years old waiting at the bus stop for school when a man approached me. I've seen him a few times prior to this encounter and didn't think anything of it. And he made convo the usual creepy, "How old are you? You're so beautiful," etc., etc. And when I told him my age, he just gave this eerily ear-to-ear grin and walked away. Years went by. I'm 18 at this point, and I get a Facebook message from that guy pouring his heart and soul out to me wanting to catch up.
My mum always gave me the don't talk to strangers and all the scenarios. When I was 8 I was riding my bike down the block, and a man in a white van pulled over and rolled his window down. He asked, "Have you seen a little white dog running around?" I said no and started riding my bike as fast as I could to my friend's house. I told his mom, and she called my mom, who came to pick me and my bike up. I don't remember if she called the police, but I remember the panic I felt when his van slowed down and his window opened, and I heard him ask about the dog. My mum had literally given me that scenario.
Back when I was a kid going to school, I was either 10 or 11Y. I had a creepy encounter with a man. I usually get a short tricycle ride to school. To save some cash, you usually wait for other passengers to fill it, 3 to 4 people. Otherwise, use pay a higher fare. I was the first passenger to ride this one trike and was waiting for other people to fill in. A few minutes in, a man comes in and asks the driver to go. I don't know what was going on in my mind that time, but I remember being uncomfortable with this man, so I got out of the trike and decided to just walk the distance. It wasn't that long of a ride. The creepy part of this is when the man also got off the trike and decided to walk in the same direction. It was unnerving and hoping that he wasn't following me. Why would he tell the driver to go without waiting for other passengers, and then also get off when I decided to not take the trike? What happened afterwards is a blur, though. I believe some tricycle drivers noticed that I was being followed, or maybe the driver found it weird and kept an eye on me. After walking for not even a minute, a trike pulled over near me and asked me if I knew the man who was following me, and promptly told him no. He asked me to get on and drove to the school without asking me to pay. While this was happening, I saw the man being told off by the other trike drivers and overhearing that they want to take him to the authorities. And that is how I avoided either a trafficker or a predator when I was a kid.
When I was 12 years old, me and my mummy were staying in Dominican Republic to fix up our house there. I couldn't sleep. And what I would do was look out the window and take in the view of the mountains for a little before trying to sleep again. But when I looked out the window at around probably midnight through the bars I saw across the street, a very uncanny person of sorts. It's so hard to describe. I couldn't see their face too well, but they were smiling and had really long hair. But they were tall, and they just stood there. I remember I checked the window a few more times throughout the night to see if they would move, and they didn't. I don't believe in paranormal stuff or aliens. I always thought that was silly. But this was the most unnatural thing I have ever seen. I was so scared I ran to my mummy's room so I wouldn't be alone. I had just a really bad feeling then. In the morning, when me and my mummy were getting ready to leave to the store, we found the stray cat we would feed dead. It was at the same spot that uncanny person I saw was standing at too. I never told my mummy of this, or anyone for that matter. I always kept it to myself because I felt nobody would believe me.
I was walking one night and tons of birds started following me. At first, I just noticed what seemed like a lot more birds flying around than usual. Most of the time, you'll see 1 or 2 at a time, unless they are migrating, and then it's just the bit V of them in the sky that passes overhead and is gone. At first, I just thought it was weird. But then over the next 10 minutes or so, there had to be dozens of them, flying around and sitting in trees or on fences and other things along the path I was going. I swore they were looking at me too, but figured I was just crazy. But it keeps feeling weirder and scarier. A bunch started flying overhead, circling or something, I don't know. But finally, I couldn't take it anymore, and I just ran as fast as I could for home, maybe a km, and as I'd look back, I swore they kept pace, but never got really close enough to me to touch me.
My dad and I were staying in my grandparents' house temporarily while we cleaned it up to be sold after my grandpa had died. My dad wasn't made of money, and the electric got shut off, but since we were only there 1 month, he left it off. It was summer, so I had no school. And during the days when he was at work, I was working my way through reading my grandma's entire novel collection. I heard so many strange noises in that house. I did a lot of growing up there over the years and had never heard these kinds of sounds before. Footsteps up in the attic, someone turning the handle to the basement door, etc. Random banging on. Walls, you name it. I chalked it all up to Grandpa. He always liked a good prank, and Halloween was his favorite holiday. I'm 100% convinced he was enjoying it with me. My dad grew up in that house and also heard the sounds in the attic one night. He said the same thing, that it was probably my grandpa trying to mess with us.
Back in 2008, my husband and I were living in a smallish town in North Carolina. We're native New Yorkers, so we never really felt welcome in the area. One night we were walking out of Food Lion to our car. As we were passing a parked car, out of the corner of my eye I saw a woman sitting in the driver's seat. She was a white woman, and her skin color blended into the headrest. As I continued walking, I swear I saw her face melt into the headrest. I was too terrified to speak, but hustled to my own vehicle a few rows over. When my husband and I got in our car, we both turned to each other with scared expressions. I started to say, "I think I saw." At the same time, my husband asked, "Did you see that?" Apparently, he saw the same thing as well. Both of us described it as melting faces that looked demonic. It's tricky putting into words what we saw, but when I heard that he saw it too, I knew I wasn't imagining anything. I don't really have an explanation, but that particular part of North Carolina always seemed so creepy. Just a few months before, my brother-in-law was killed on the highway next to that Food Lion. Also, my husband said he hit a big gray dog but never found the body. He was surrounded by flat fields.
Sometimes I don't recognize people. People know I have issues with faces, but sometimes I'm looking all over them and I get this feeling like they've been replaced. I've got a thing about doppelgangers, and I usually ask them a question then, because something about it feels worse if they're quiet. The sound of their voice breaks the delusion or something. But I haven't told anyone I get scared like this sometimes, when people I know don't look right and won't say anything. I don't want them to think I'm crazy when I know it's not real. Few times my father scared the shit out of me because he's contrary and quiet. Like, imagine someone walks in one night who looks like your father but doesn't feel right. You say hello and he looks at you but doesn't speak. You ask a question and he smiles but doesn't answer. He's also one to not answer when I do the horror movie Hello, because he doesn't tell people where he is or when he'll be home, leaving. So I'll hear something in the garage and be like, "Hello? Anyone there?" And he just continues making shuffling movement noises, not answering, until I open the door and he's like, "What, me? The person in the garage at a weird hour making soft, creepy noises in the dark as I quietly do woodworking or smoke?" I love my father, but he's creepy as hell sometimes now that I think about it. Lamau. He took me to his work once when I was a kid, and it was completely empty in the office side of the factory on a work day. He's a foreman, so he left me in his office for a while so he could go through to the factory side, and I didn't hear or see anyone or anything but him and the fluorescent lights all day. Not even the machines. To be fair, though, I know he has co-workers somewhere, because he learned to make tamales from an older woman he works with recently.
One night when we were kids, my brother and I were playing in our room. Suddenly, our dad came in. He asked us if we had made any calls lately. He looked really worried and scared. We said no. He said that a man just called the house. The man said that he was calling from prison and there was a boy from this number that had been calling and harassing his wife. He said he was getting out tomorrow and he was going to find our house and handle it. Obviously, we hadn't made any calls and it was a prank call, but the fact that it was a grown man doing it who knew our number gives me chills. I believe the same man made other calls to our house at least a couple other times, one disguising his voice as a creepy old lady. I think I have an idea of who it was, but we never found out for sure.
About a year ago, my wife and I were asleep. I'm on my left side all of a sudden, my right side of my head goes numb, and my ear starts ringing. I felt an odd pressure, not heavy, but like something was touching me. Looked to my right, and it's a human figure leaning over me, just looking at me. This person was all black, could only see facial expressions. I told it to leave me the F alone. The figure's face kinda chances from curious to startled, like I couldn't believe I could see it. It took a few steps back and slowly turned into this dusty stuff and floated towards the window and then went out the window. Just as the last bit of the dust goes out the window, we no shit lose power. There were no storms. It was a perfect night outside We rarely ever lost power. That's when my wife woke up and asked how we lost power. That's when I got up and looked out the window and looked at the curtains to see if I was seeing shit. That's when the wife asked what I was doing. I told her what happened and she said, "Don't tell me things like that in the dark." Power came back on about 2 minutes after. I laid back down and went to sleep.
One night, I think me and my friend accidentally brought home a serial killer and/or rapist. Me and my drinking buddy went out a lot at the time. We were at the bar near my house when we started chatting it up with some middle-aged guy at the bar in a suit with a briefcase. He was very strange, but there was no one else to talk to, so we started hanging out with him. His demeanor was very ODD in that he constantly switched between seeming kind of weird, helpless, handicapped, to super confident, intelligent, and more savvy than us. He'd make vast contradictory statements like saying he needed to find weed to make marijuana oil for his sick grandmother who had cancer. We said don't worry, we could hook him up and help his grandmother. 10 minutes later into this discussion, he suddenly said, "My grandmother's not dying of cancer. I can get my own weed. I have my own legal grow-op going." Then started offering us a job at his grow-op plant, got us all excited to work there. And then halfway into the conversation, he suddenly just said, "I don't own a grow-op." We just thought he was sort of weird, and we were in this phase where we were trying to help people, so we thought we'd invite him over for a beer because he probably didn't have any friends. Fast forward to my place near the bar, and he comes inside with us to smoke a joint. I didn't think it was important at the time, but I noticed when he entered my place that he immediately just threw his jacket and briefcase onto the floor of my living room kind of rudely for some reason. I thought it was weird for a guy wearing a suit to do that. Right as we started to smoke the joint with him, he started to lean back and just stare at us. Not like he was stoned, but like he was waiting for something. He also stopped responding to our questions. Suddenly, I had the feeling like my gut was falling into the floor or something. I got tunnel vision and felt like I had done too many reps at the gym. Like that feeling you might collapse or puke or something. I looked over at my friend and he was feeling the same thing. We were about to double over when we hung on to each other and kind of rode the feeling out. Somehow, by some freaking miracle of tolerance or the literal power of friendship, we didn't go down. I thought for sure we were going to pass out right there in the kitchen. We recovered quickly and started asking him about philosophy as we cracked open a couple of beers. I don't know the explanation, but he suddenly looked very ill. He excused himself quickly to go to the bathroom, and we were so stupid or used to doing drugs that neither of us thought anything of it at the time. He didn't come out of the bathroom for hours, and when he did, he got us to call him a cab. I remember walking him to my front gate and me saying, "That's some pretty good weed, hey?" I was just trying to bug him about being in the bathroom for so long, so he must have gotten really high, I assumed. His reply was very cryptic. He looked at me and said, "Oh no, I've smoked way better weed than that." I was super puzzled, but then he just goes, "You have no idea what you guys did for me." And he left in the cab. Piecing the night together afterward, I realized he must have spiked our drinks with GHB or fentanyl at the bar. The reason he tossed his briefcase and jacket onto the floor so callously was because he was expecting us to pass out. He was just waiting for whatever he spiked our drinks with to kick in. There was no way he could have taken both or even one of us physically. When it didn't work, he became severely emotionally deflated, like a coke user finding out he wouldn't be able to score that night. Either that, or he accidentally spiked his own drink or drank one of ours accidentally. The reason he acted so contradictory was because it was a manipulation tactic to get our guard down and assume he was either harmless or potentially a very rich person that we could benefit from getting to know. Our dumb assess didn't see it coming. I still shudder to think what was in that guy's briefcase and what would have happened if we had passed out.
I'm hiking with my dog Indy in the woods north of Clare, MI. MI Peps will back me up on this, but once you go north enough, it's forest primeval, deep, dense, and dark. And far enough out there, cell phone service is a no-go. It's like sundown-ish, got about another 1-2 hour to go. I'm way jogging back to the car, 'cause it's just a really good idea to not get lost in the forest at night, in case nobody's ever shared that with you. Scary part. I hear some yelling for help. It's a woman's voice. I'm thinking, check it out, 'cause if someone is in trouble, then lend a hand. But years of training is telling me do not make yourself known, move silently until you've been able to get an idea of what's actually going on, because the sad reality is there are groups of tweakers out there and they have been known to do stuff like this as bait for robbery or trafficking. I'm zeroing in on the yelling, it's getting closer, and then it stops. I'm like now in a full-blown state of search and rescue, but I'm being silent, accurately aware that there is now only like 10 to 20 min of real daylight left. All of a sudden, the silence is shattered by a chilling scream at top volume and panicked, getting goosebumps talking about it. Run. I'm 44 and I've lived through my fair amount of shit. And something instinctual was like, yep, bravery be damned, it's time to bail, like now, grab my dog. Mercifully, he was super close by. I'm not abandoning lil bubs, no way, and jet tracking back to the main path that leads to the parking lot. Get to the trail and start double timing back. Middle age rears its ugly head, and an old knee injury is keeping me from moving as fast, and instincts and urgency are telling me I should. Out of breath sweating, I see the park, disc golf course, adjacent to the parking. Get to the car and hurl Indy into the back seat. Start the car, TXU Volvo One Love, and start driving out fast. Last scary thing. Look in the rear view and see about 10 flashlights coming towards the parking area. Punk kids fing with me. Crazy forest meth addicts glad. I never found out. For those that care about Indy, I celebrated by stress-eating Burger King.
I had a stalker. He would call me, threaten me, follow me home, steal my things, leave weird things at my apartment. Sometimes he would sit outside my work in his car for hours, far enough where he'd drive off if I tried to confront him, but close enough so I could see him. He even followed me hundreds of miles when I moved, thinking I was going to break at one point, but I didn't want him to win and learned to ignore him. This went on for years. Realized he got bored when he didn't. Scare me anymore, just became numb to all of it.
It happened in my first apartment. I barely left the place other than getting groceries and the occasional doctor's appointment. I did commission work online, so I didn't go out for work and wasn't very social. Got reconnected with some old friends online and decided to have an overnight visit to a couple towns over. It was only an hour and a half away, but I didn't like the highway at night, so it was better to stay until morning. Packed an overnight bag, locked up and left. My friends dropped me off early the next morning around 7:30 a.m. I go up the stairs, get to my door, and see that my doorknob is on my mat, and it's kind of mangled, and an entirely new doorknob is on my door. I tried my key, but it didn't work. I start to panic. I'm picking up the pieces of the broken doorknob, and there's what looks like a note. It's a crudely drawn map of the front of the apartment, with a line from my door down the stairs to the parking lot. Then there are 3 circles, with one circle drawn around in a loop. I go downstairs, and where the circles are my neighbor's potted plants. I'm confused for a moment, look around to see if there's anyone near, and tip up the planter. Under it is a key. I take the key and go back up to my door with the new lock. It unlocks my door, my place is trashed. All of my closet doors, kitchen cupboards, drawers, everything is open, and my things emptied onto the ground. All the cutlery is on the floor, but plates and bowls are stacked on the counters. All my hung-up clothes are on the floor. Drawers, full of old paperwork and appliance manuals, are scattered in the hall. It's a mess. I assume I was robbed and start to panic, but my PC and PS3 are accounted for. Those were the only pricey things I really had. I check for my birth certificate. It's on the floor but accounted for. Nothing obvious was stolen. The bathroom was untouched. Nothing was taken from the fridge, but I was paranoid and poured out the milk in my haze of disbelief and confusion. I call up my landlord, and he drives down to assess any damages. He claims that he has no idea what happened, but that we have to change the locks again. I stay back and clean up the mess, and he returns with a new doorknob plus deadbolt and 2 new keys plus copies for himself. He claims that he and I are the only other people who had the first key, and I confirm that I didn't have an extra copy, nor did I give anyone else a copy. It was just bizarre, and also weird that it was the only day I had left overnight, and the only people who knew were my friends who I was with the whole time, and who drove me out of town and back. Nothing was stolen, though, and even though they broke the lock, they made a map to the key of the knob it was replaced with. It looked like it was removed with violence. It must have been loud. My neighbors claim to have seen and heard nothing. Even though the landlord got new locks, I still moved out pretty quick after that. I have no idea who did it, why they replaced the lock and drew a map to the key, and why they didn't steal anything, not to mention that nobody witnessed it happening. That was a very paranoid couple of months afterwards. When I was home, I would lodge a kitchen chair under the new knob just in case, and I began compulsively checking that it was locked throughout the day. It wasn't healthy.
Years ago, I was driving in front of an old tow truck on PCH at dusk. On the side of the road, a very young girl was walking with a short skirt on. She walked off PCH and onto a side street just as we passed. In my rearview mirror, I saw the truck turn around, so I flipped a U-turn to follow and monitor. He flipped another U-turn and slowly turned up the same street the young girl walked up. I sped up and followed. He passed her with me directly behind him now. I rolled down my window to tell her that I saw him do that and that I'd stay with her until she made it home. She looked like she had seen a ghost and began walking very fast until she got to her house. Felt and looked like something out of a horror movie.
I was cycling home late at night after the rain. The day had been quite hot, and the pavement was steaming as water misted off hot concrete. The streetlights along that stretch of road were useless as overgrown trees blocked the light, casting shadows on the pavement. The only light I had to navigate by was my bicycle's headlight, so I was laser-focused on that it was shining on to avoid crashing into anything. Which is how I noticed the mist swirling up from the floor, rising in little columns, and the columns, each roughly the size of a person, were moving back and forth like people walking down the street. I'll tell you that I have never cycled that blind before in my entire life. I didn't dare look away from the ground, in case my eyes saw something they weren't supposed to see.
I used to work at Target, and the first week of work, the first closing shift I had, they sent me out to collect carts. No problem. I'd done it the day before. You just put on the safety vest and go. There were still a few customers in the store, so I didn't think too much about vehicles driving around the parking lot. However, when I had just come out the front of the store, a man in a big black pickup truck drove up from the corner of the lot, rolled down his window, and said hi. I said, "Hi back," expecting him to have a question about when we closed or something along those lines. Instead, this man goes, "If I ask you nicely, will you get into my truck?" I froze, sure that I didn't hear him say what it sounded like, so I said, "I'm sorry, what?" This man repeats himself. I say, "Sorry, but no," and he says, "That's a shame," and drives off. I hightail it back into the store and tell the manager on duty. Thankfully, she believed me and was understandably horrified, and several of us went out together to collect the carts, just in case. The next shift I have, the store's security guy approaches me and asks if I was the one approached by the man in the truck. I say yes, and he just tells me I did the right thing. However, I should have had a walkie-talkie and a partner, and to ensure I'm not sent out alone in the future. The store was a lot more strict about ensuring safety measures from then on.
I was dead tired from work when I came home one night. After I got myself ready for bed, I lay down under my covers and was about to fall asleep, but found myself drifting consciously and unconsciously, in and out, almost hypnotically while trying to sleep. When the last of my consciousness was about to slip away, I heard something strange, very soft and meek, almost impossible to hear unless you strain your ears, whispers. The more I concentrated on them, the more goosebumps I began to feel. Those whispers gradually grew loud and louder, eventually engulfing my entire bedroom. I snapped out of my dreamlike state and was 100% wide awake after that, about to get up to check whatever the hell was going on before I blacked out. I awoke the next morning on my bed, under my covers with no recollection or idea how I lost consciousness. Maybe I was just too tired, or maybe it was all a dream. Either way, the marks on the blanket from myself gripping the sheets were still there.
I was a young 19-year-old dude, home after working a new job at my local grocery store and texting online with a long distance, quite toxic now ex of mine. I was a desperate, sad loser and put up with a lot of petty abusive things, which I only mention for context. We were chatting well into the night, and at 12:43 a.m., I remember the time, I received an incoming call from a no-caller id. I still remember the feeling in my gut, not yet a sense of dread, but more so a growing unease. Now the gal I was, texting with was a very mentally ill person, and truthfully was the kind of person to do this kind of thing if she ever wanted to call. She didn't. So most of me assumed, hoped, this might have been her. So after the fourth ring, I answered. The woman on the other end sounded very mature, 50s or so, and addressed me by name in response to my nervous, hello? Her name was Regina, so she said. She described in graphic detail how she was intimately pleasuring herself with a toy, to the thought of me, no less. I remember chuckling nervously, very caught off guard and trying to play it off, telling them they had the wrong number. They proceeded to accurately describe me, my appearance, and even the department I was working in. They then went further, graphically detailing my body, describing various sexual acts they'd like to perform on me and trying to command me to describe what I'd like to do to her. I was absolutely shocked into silence. I still remember the feeling of dread and pure terror that began to wash over me. A sharp, scratchy feeling deep inside the back of my throat like I was scared to breathe. I felt so disgusted, terrified, and violated, I struggled to move for what must have been a good 20 seconds or so. Once I didn't answer, she began to gently repeat, "Honey, honey, baby." When I finally regained my wits, I hung up the call, immediately placing my phone into Do Not Disturb mode, so the calls would go to voicemail. Good thing, as Regina attempted to call back 4 more times during the next 10 minutes. I hadn't felt pure fear and dread like that since I was a young teen, and my mom's drunk BF was trying to break into the house to hurt her. Many occasions to pick from there. I never found out who Regina was, and thankfully she never contacted me again. I asked around the grocery store, but nobody knew a worker or customer by that name. On a more humorous note, when I told Gal what was happening, she flat out told me, "This is why I don't make calls, random phone call. From creepy stalker lady makes me feel violated and scared."
I was crossing the road with my friend and the light was green for us. She crossed a little earlier than I did and got hit by a taxi running a red light. I was devastated. She was my best friend. Dialed for the ambulance, and then I woke up. It was a dream. As I got ready for my morning, the dream lost its edges, and I'm pretty sure I started to forget my dream. On my way to work, I remember waking up in tears and being really upset, but not knowing why I was upset. I could not remember what I was dreaming about. I just knew I was upset. Then after work, while on the way to meet my friend, I noticed the environment seemed familiar, like I've seen the passerby before, and the cars that go by met up with my friend and we crossed the road. Light went green for us to cross. My body sort of moved on its own. I didn't move as she started to walk. I grabbed her shoulders and pulled her back. A taxi whizzed past us. That moment I realized that I dreamt this moment, and my dream memories came back to me. This happened 21 years ago. Till this day, she still talks about how I saved her life. I haven't told her or any of my friends the reason why I was able to save her was because I dreamt of her death. My friends are pretty superstitious, and it might not go over well. Another incident. My great-grandfather passed away in the early morning at the hospice. I dreamt of him visiting me in my apartment, giving me a warm hug and saying goodbye. In my dream, I said, "I'll see you later after work." He said, "This is the last time we will see each other." When I woke up, I wrote, "Hide it down immediately so I wouldn't forget." A couple of hours later, we got the call from one of our relatives that he passed.
When I was like 21, this preppy guy name was Elmfow Skippy, and he was driving a BMW convertible or something. He approaches me in the A&P grocery line. I had walked from my place to store for sun and exercise, and I was polite, friendly, assuming it was just a passing flirtation. Well, I'm walking home and he's driving by, slowing down, and is pushing me to get in the car and won't leave me alone. Suddenly, a surge of cars behind him forced him off. When I thought that's a relief. Well, I started getting these weird messages of that real daunting and dark classical music you hear in horror flicks, murder movies, etc., slasher flicks periodically. Then he'd call me saying things like, "I'm right outside your apt building," he'd describe what I wore, where I went, etc. I was once hanging out with some girlfriends and he scared us so badly we wound up changing motel rooms 3 ekas in one night because by then I quit staying at my apartment. He followed me a lot, enough to know about the people I worked for at the time, and he called my mother too and asked if she worked doing the same thing. Then he asked her if she'd have sex with him for cash. You can imagine Mom was flipping out. And I was speechless and told her that's just some idiot who came into the club stalking me. Well, after he did that, I managed to get his R-hour info from a friend harassed and threatened his life if he calls my mom or any family again. I said, "You know all about me and should know I can make it happen."
Kind of late, but still about a year ago when I was a high school sophomore and lived in a small town. The town was separate to two parts, the center where most people live, and the outer part with coffee fields mostly in the pine forest, and I in these parts fairly far from the center. Most of my schedule involved me drove a motorbike to school at 6:30 a.m. and arrived back to home at 8:45 p.m., sometimes due to extra classes, through a very dark part of the forest. At that night, just like every night I go back to my home, a terrified human-like scream came out of the blue, and that scared me so much I sped up to 70 km/h. I deck my 50cc bike can reach up to such speed at that time, back my home. After that, I managed to calm down from the adrenaline and start suspecting that someone is pulling a prank with an Aztec death whistle, as I did some research about it before my guess was true. It was some kid who also did it to other uncles who also went back home from the coffee fields that same time. They got busted and get the right punishment they deserved were involved, and now everyone hate them. Come to think of it again, I never tell my parents or friends about this.
One summer when I was 13, my mother decided to get me a job babysitting her friends' kids full-time. This friend lived over 100 miles away in a tiny redneck town I'd never heard of. My parents bought a small travel trailer and parked it out there for me to live in. I learned how to pay my way in life by using my small cash earnings to pay space rent and survived off mostly popsicles and Hot Pockets. The couple I babysat for had major DV issues, and the children were always dirty, often bruised, and while I often wasn't around when the father was, I could tell he was both verbally and physically abusive to them. They were the only people I knew in this town. All in all, I ended up staying there for about 4 months. Then the wife and kids fled to another state, and my parents picked me back up. I was then stalked and harassed by the man they'd left behind, as he was convinced I'd helped and knew where. I did, but that's besides the point. I'm so creeped out by these events, they hardly even seem real, y'all. I'm very grateful that somehow I landed in a redneck town where no one took advantage of the tiny pubescent child who was all alone in the middle of nowhere with no protection at all. The nightmares I have thought about everything that could have happened are almost as real.
Someone tried to kidnap me as a kid. Got home late at night, and a white van drove down the street fast before pulling straight into my driveway. The driver leaned out of the window slightly and offered me a newspaper. She said they were delivering them like it wasn't 9 p.m., and they hadn't just skipped 5 houses to pull directly up to me. The woman was driving, but I could just barely see a man in the passenger seat. Found out later, a local school had been warned of a white van trying to pick up kids in the area.
One day, I was in the kitchen making dinner for my family. My mom and my 2 sisters were out shopping quite late. It was in the winter, so it was pretty dark around 6 p.m. My father was in the room next door to the kitchen, and the layout of my house makes it easy to hear from the other room since it's open. We have a camera on the kitchen wall, so the outside of the entire house is visible. Whilst I was cooking, my thoughts became so clear to the point where I felt as if someone was talking to me through my thoughts. Then all of a sudden, I hear someone with a voice that sounded like my younger sister called my name. I immediately looked at the camera thinking my mom and sisters returned home, but there was nobody there. So I went back to cooking, thinking it was just my mind. Just then, my dad calls out my sister's name because he too heard the voice. My mom and sisters returned an hour after that happened.
I once had a moment that still creeps me out to this day. I was home alone one night, sitting in my living room with all the doors locked, when I suddenly heard a whisper, clear as day, right behind me. It was a low, breathy voice that said, "My name." I froze, heart pounding, and turned around, but no one was there. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but then my dog, who had been sleeping, shot up and started growling at the empty space behind me. I have no explanation for what happened, and I never told anyone because I figured no one would believe me. But even now, I can still hear that voice in my head, and I have no idea who or what said my name that night.
I already talked about this, but I have 2 cases that I will summarize. My mother and brother are spiritualists, and they mess with these things. Once with the earphone, I heard a voice calling me, but I always knew that we couldn't answer. I took the phone off, and waited for them to call again to see if it was my mother. And nothing. I put the phone back on, and they called me again. I did the same thing, and nothing. I put the phone back on. It happened once again. And on the fourth, I heard a sort of growl along with a grunt of anger, like when our plans go wrong, it was clear, and I just pretended I didn't hear. After about 15 minutes, my mother came into the room, and I asked if someone had called me, and she denied. Another time, it was an event that I had at school that had a legend that macabre things had happened on the second floor, and this had been going on for a long time, as my brother had also studied there, and he reinforced the legends. But this story is quite long, and if you want, I'll tell you, just tell me. Anyway, I followed a very small channel that told macabre stories about followers, and I decided to send this story. While I was writing the email, my laptop turned off about 5 times in a row. It barely stayed on for 5 minutes, and then turned off. Again, this had never happened before, but I didn't give up sending it. It was as if something didn't want me to share it, you know?
Back when I was in middle school, I was coming back from a class by foot and felt this unsettling thing behind me, and I looked back and saw a man following me. Mind you, the whole street was empty, and at first I didn't think much of it. Then I looked back again and saw the guy was still very eerily and slowly walking behind me on the sidewalk. That was when my brain went run, and I did. The entire way home, and when I got home, I would have been able to win a prize or SMTH, because I literally came all the way home running in 2 mins. That's when on a normal day it would have taken me at least 10 mins. On the way back, I kept looking back, and the guy was there, and then when I got home I saw a bike pass by, and the same guy was on it with another person passing by. I jumped inside the house so fast and slammed the door so hard, the entire building shook, I think. Never saw the guy around after that day.
When I was a teenager, I took a walk up this hill close to my grandparents' farm. When I reached the top, I sat on one of those round bales. I had a really good view and was watching the cars go by at the foot of the hill. I saw a person walking in the distance next to one of those fields, but turned away because it was nobody that I recognized. While I was playing on my phone a bit, I noticed that the person, some random guy, came closer, and I thought it was just a hiker. I was playing a bit on my phone when I suddenly heard some leaves crunching behind me. After I turned around, I realized that it was a man. He left the hiking path, had picked up a log, and was directly approaching me in a fast manner. I jumped off the bale and ran across the field. I didn't look back, but pulled my phone out and called my cousin. I was out of breath running and told her some random shit on the phone. She seemed confused, but didn't press for more answers. After a couple minutes of running, I came on a road and walked home. He didn't follow me. I don't know why I told nobody about it.
I took a few summer classes when I was in college. On the way back to my apartment, I had to pass a spot on campus where 2 walkways ran sort of parallel to each other. One was on top of a hill, overlooking a path that ran alongside it at the bottom. One day I'm walking along the lower path when I hear a camera click, and I look up to see a guy crouched down behind some ornamental grass at the top of the hill with a camera pointed directly at me. It's the middle of summer on a pretty dead college campus, and I am the only person on this path. So I stop and ask the guy what he's doing. He acts surprised that I can see him. It's mid-afternoon in July, and he's hiding behind a bunch of what's basically sparse weeds, and fumbles for an explanation, going, I'm just taking pictures for promotional material. If he was taking pictures for brochures or what have you, wouldn't he have waited until 1, there were more people, to make it look less dead, or 2, there were no people, so he could get uninterrupted shots of the campus? Not knowing what else to do, I just kept walking. Might have told my roommate about it later that day, I honestly don't remember.
More than one thing encountering some people who were with disturbing behavior, not necessarily crazy, but unsettling nonetheless. Now, I might have overreacted in some of these cases, but anyway. Examples: being asked by 2 people a mundane question while waiting on a bus stop. A man and woman who looked creepy, as if with some slight physical deformity in their faces. I don't mean to sound nasty, they were maybe just born like that. It's just that I was creeped out even if they didn't mean to harm me. But human nature? Uncanny valley or something. Also, while I was walking casually on the street, a woman came to me and insisted I put my jacket on. I was so scared. A stranger stopping me suddenly and saying bizarre things. I quickly ran. Two other people, also visibly mentally and physically disturbed, approached me while walking my dog. One of them, a man around 50, acted so disgusting, making scary noises as if imitating animals, and scared my dog. Then, when she barked at him, he snapped back verbally in a mean way toward her. I was so pissed, aside from scared. People scare me sometimes so much.
I was 20 years old, leaving uni for the day, walking across the quad to the station by myself, when this guy stopped me and gestured for me to take off my headphones. I do, naively, and he says, "You don't remember me, do you?" Now, he was so much older than me that I thought he was going to say that he was a friend of my dad's when I was little. He's the same age as my parents, certainly. "You don't remember me," he says. "From local bar the weekend before last, we had a great time together. You really were wasted, weren't you?" What this guy doesn't know is that I've never been to the bar he's talking about, and I've also been teetotal for 18 months. So I tell him that, and his face falls. Suddenly he doesn't have much to say. As he's frantically trying to cover his arse, I see what he's doing. Tell him nice try and walk away. He lets me. Dude was seriously lurking outside a university campus, finding likely-looking young women, and trying to convince them that they knew him and could trust him. If he'd wanted to do real harm, he wouldn't have gone about it like that, I know, but it was skeezy as hell nonetheless.
3 guys tried to break into my house when I was like 10 years old. My family had a cottage growing up, so it was the night before my dad and I were going to drive there in the morning. Mom and siblings were already there. For some reason, I don't remember why they went first. So because of the fact that we were going to the cottage, I just so happened to be sleeping in the upstairs family room that night. We lived in a super quiet, safe neighborhood, and at about 12:02 a.m. I don't remember exactly when I heard a car door shut, thought it was weird for that time of night, so I peeked through the blinds, and 3 adult men were walking right up our walkway, towards the front door. As soon as they got to the porch, my dog noticed someone was outside and started barking. Big dog with powerful bark. And they all ran away, got back into the car, and sped off. IDK why I never told my dad.
I went to a study-type place in Hollywood one time. I got extremely stoned in my car beforehand. It was dark by the time I stepped out of the parking lot. I entered the building and was told they'd be closing soon, so I just walked around the area. Looking back, I think it was probably because I reeked of weed. I was headed to the Starbucks down the sidewalk until a guy across the street started taunting me. I assumed he was homeless, but he seemed to have well-fitted clothes on. Anyway, the guy started following me, but he was laughing maniacally while doing it, like laughing extremely loud. He didn't seem to care about other pedestrians passing. Him, just me. In order to get to the Starbucks, I would have had to pass him, so I ended up going down a different way, which was a dark alleyway. As soon as I turned the corner, I sprinted and created distance from him. I was pretty far from the parking lot at this point, so I just wandered around in the dark for a bit, until I felt it was safe to make my way back. Haven't been to Hollywood by myself since.
I used to live in a really ritzy downtown apartment with my girlfriend at the time. Every unit had one wall that was just floor-to-ceiling windows. So did the hallway where you'd access your front door. If we had our curtains open in our apartment, the inside of it would be completely visible from the hallway. We were making out on the couch and things were getting hot and heavy. She pulled away for a second, and all of a sudden she's looking past me with this look of concern on her face. She says, "Is that an iPhone flashlight?" Turned to look, and sure enough, there was a tall man in the hallway pointing his phone. Flashlight out the hallway window and into ours. When he noticed I had seen him, he turned and bolted. I came running out the door to confront him. The unit across from us was vacant and had an odd little window above the door. I saw no sign of the guy, but when I came back into my apartment, my girlfriend told me that he had been leering over me, peeking down from that window and watching me. I don't know if the dude was taking a video or just peeping, but it was super weird, and I can't shake the feeling that somewhere online there's a creepy video of my ex and I sucking face on the couch.
When I was a kid, my AAU basketball games would be up at West Point time to time. It was the late 90s. It was pretty dark and the dead of winter, and we were driving up through Bear Mountain. My dad was driving. My mum was in the passenger seat. My nan, my sister, and myself were in the back seats. All of a sudden, a naked woman comes running from the woods and onto the road. She ran to our car and was banging on my dad's window, screaming for help. I remember she had blood all over her, especially down her legs, and she was terrified, absolutely terrified. I'll never forget the look of fear on her face. Right then, a bunch of cop cars pulled up and took her in and waved us on. To this day, I can't find anything in the news about it. It took me until I was older to realize that she was most likely raped, among other horrible things. I never told anyone because of the fact that there's nothing to corroborate my story, but I know I didn't make it up because my family saw it also and have the same exact memory.
I have two weird ones and a dream that I have. First, some grandma-looking old lady tried to kidnap me as a kid, pulled up in front of my house in a Pacifica or something and asked if I wanted candy. Luckily, I was very picky with my candy and said no BC. I thought she had like old lady mints or those gross strawberry wrapper candy instead of what I liked. She was very insistent for about a minute, and that is when I started panicking. Why are you so desperate to give candy? And I began to call for my parents. That is when she sped off, but I wonder if someone else was waiting in the back of the van for me. Glad she left 2BC. I think my parents weren't able to hear me from the yard and the front door was locked or something. Second, I have a lot of fillings and I swear at certain times laying in a certain way on my bed, I can hear a radio station in my head. I can never make out what they are saying, but it always sounds faintly like some radio car dealership ad. Or something, but kinda quiet and staticky. I have tried to pinpoint where else the noise could be coming from, but there is nowhere else. And as soon as I move my head from where it is on the pillow, it goes away.
When I was a kid, my AAU basketball games would be up at West Point time to time. It was the late 90s, it was pretty dark and the dead of winter, and we were driving up through Bear Mountain. My dad was driving, my mum was in the passenger seat, my nan, my sister, and myself were in the back seats. All of a sudden, a naked woman comes running from the woods and onto the road. She ran to our car and was banging on my dad's window, screaming for help. I remember she had blood all over her, especially down her legs, and she was terrified, absolutely terrified. I'll never forget the look of fear on her face. Right then, a bunch of cop cars pulled up and took her in and waved us on. To this day, I can't find anything in the news about it. It took me until I was older to realize that she was most likely raped, among other horrible things. I never told anyone because of the fact that there's nothing to corroborate my story, but I know I didn't make it up because my family saw it also and have the same exact memory.
When I was around 13, I chatted with someone online I believed to be my friend. We lost contact, and I didn't really think of it for a long time. I am now 35, and a few months ago I came across someone with a similar name, and I remembered him, and Googled his name because I remembered he wanted to be a writer and was wondering if he got anywhere with it. I found an article saying he'd been arrested and imprisoned for child and extreme animal indecent things. This is where I realized suppressed memories are a real thing, and I remembered being groomed and what actually was said in our messages, rather than just thinking, he likes me. He was 35 when I was 13, and there's a high chance the pictures found on his computer are me included. Don't worry, I'm in therapy.